bhavatu sahano bhunaktu sahaviryam karavavahai tejasvinavaditamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. Well, a wonderful good morning to you all. As you know, we're studying Swami Prabhavananda's How to Know God, and we're discussing a number of aphorisms. The Swami is discussing a number of aphorisms that talk about what it is that we need to do to actually practice yoga as defined by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. And we'll start with this. I can't exactly read the page, but wait a minute. Looks like it's page 29.
Yes, Brother Shankara, that's where I am too.
Okay. So we'll start with this. Non-attachment. Non-attachment is the exercise of discrimination. We gradually gain control of the painful. We gradually gain control of the painful or impure thought waves by asking over and over, why do I really desire that object? And another way of thinking about this is to say, does this deserve my attention? Does this desire that I have for that object deserve my attention? What deserves my attention? That is a useful way to think about discrimination. So the Swami says, non-attachment is the exercise of that discrimination. We gradually gain control of the painful or impure thought waves by asking ourselves, why do I really dissolve that? Why do I really desire that object? What permanent advantage should I gain by possessing it? In what way would its possession help me toward greater knowledge and freedom? And of course, that is our goal, the knowledge of ourselves, known as within yoga as the Atman, and the freedom, or as Patanjali refers to it, independence, kaivalya. So in what way would possession of that object help me toward greater knowledge and freedom? And in most instances, we'll find, of course, that the answer is it wouldn't help me at all. As a matter of fact, it would probably be an entanglement or a hindrance. And so the idea is to remove through discrimination the obstacles, the hindrances, the fetters, and be more and more free and more in possession of what really will be of use to us, which is greater knowledge of the self. So the Swami goes on to say, the answers to these questions are always disconcerting. They show us that the desired object is not only useless as a means to liberation, but potentially harmful as a means to ignorance and bondage. And further, that our desire is not really desire for the object in itself at all, but only a desire to desire something, a mere restlessness of the mind. And this is what the Swami would stressed to us over and over. When we allow the mind to be restless, it will fix itself on something that it thinks, that the mind thinks will provide us some happiness, some freedom, some joy. And of course, as he goes on to point out, when we actually possess that thing or have that experience that we've been desiring, there is a moment or some moments of joy, of happiness. Why? Because the mind is not restless, and the truth of our being, which is happiness and freedom, emerges from behind that restlessness. And so we think, oh, now I'm happy, now I'm free. But it doesn't last long when the object of desire and the satisfaction of that desire is within time, space, and causation. It just won't last. It will arise and pass away. So we're seeking that which does not arise and does not pass away, that which is eternal, infinite, and changeless. That's what we're seeking. So the object in itself will not help at all. It's only a desire to desire something, a mere restlessness of the mind. It is fairly easy to reason out in a calm, reason all this out. It is fairly easy to reason all this out in a calm moment. But our non-attachment is put to the test when the mind is suddenly swept by a huge wave of anger or lust or greed. Then it is only by determined effort of will that we can remember what our reason already knows, that this wave and the sense object which raised it, and the ego sense which identifies the experience with itself, are all alike transient and superficial, that they are not the underlying reality with a capital R. The underlying reality with a capital R is the Atman, as within yoga it's called the Atman, which is identical with the term or thought Brahman, which we find elsewhere within these teachings. The characteristics of the Atman are Satchidananda, existence, knowledge, bliss. So this is when we are in our true existence, and we're in that field of true deep knowledge and bliss. These are three separate terms for something that it cannot really be parsed apart. Satchidananda, Satchidananda Atman, or Satchidananda Brahman. So that's what we're really seeking. That is the underlying reality that the Swami is speaking of. So let's pause and see if there are any thoughts from your own wisdom or experience, or any concerns or questions you'd like to express about what has been said so far about the definition of non-attachment and what we must, if we're going to achieve, if we want to achieve that non-attachment, what then we must do to achieve it. Anything at all.
When the Swami talks about why do I desire that object, that might be a material object, but it could also be like a person as well, like a
Oh,
vehicle.
yes. Or it can be an experience that we had long ago of taking a vacation in the Loire Valley of France. And how I'd love to do that again. Or it may be some projection into the future of, oh, my birthday is coming up. I hope so-and-so gives me such and such. The restlessness of the mind is endless. It's truly, it's endless. It reflects our infinitude. It's endless in its capacity to desire something within time, space, and causation, because that's all it knows. So yes, you're absolutely right, Brahmadas. And often at times it is a person. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara, this is Haima.
Yes, Haima?
It is very true. He said non-attachment may come very slowly, but even its earliest stages are rewarded by new sense of freedom and peace. That is very true through the meditation for me, my personal experience. Sense of freedom and peace, and not reactive to opposition.
Thank you for reminding us of that, Haima. It's wonderful that has been the fruit of your spiritual discipline and having a regular practice over many years. And it is not something that will be isolated to Haima. Any of us who do it will achieve that result. But you must be regular, and you must be patient with yourself and with the process, and live in the expectation that this discipline, this regular practice over a long period of time will yield the results. Thank you, Haima. Anything else from anyone?
Brother Shankara.
Yes, dear.
So sometimes, like, we don't desire a particular object or objects, but because the society has kind of like evolved that they have to give gift on such and such a day or this, and they give something which we don't really desire, but because we don't want to hurt the other person's feeling, do we like offer it to God and accept it? How does that work?
Well, if someone gives us something, our acceptance of it first has to be conditioned by our understanding of why they gave it to us. If they gave it to us in any sense as a bribe, they want us to do something or be something in relationship with them, then that gift is suspect and probably should be given away again as soon as possible, given to free will, given to goodwill or whatever it is. If you understand and have the intuition that this gift was given to you in love, and that there are no strings attached to it, then it's fine to receive it. And you can receive it in whatever way you wish. Of course, if we wish, now, this is jumping tracks a little, but it's also there in the niyamas that we offer everything to the divine. The yamas talk about not receiving gifts and the conditions, and the Swami will discuss this as we go on. But this business of receiving gifts, and for that matter, giving gifts, we need to think, are we doing this so that this person will do or be something? Or are we giving it out of genuine appreciation or love? Or, as you pointed out, Are we just giving it ceremonially because it's their birthday or Christmas or whatever the heck it is, Diwali, and we're just giving it because that's what's expected of us? So all of these considerations can be set aside if we just don't really involve ourselves with the gift. But if it is something we involve ourselves with, then for the right reasons, then it's best, as Sri Krishna says, to offer it, to live sacramentally and offer it. Thank you, Swayam. Good point. And when we get
Thank
to
you.
the yamas, when we get to the yamas and niyamas, we'll see a Patanjali's solution for all these things. Anything else?
Hari Om Shankaraji.
Hari Om Balaji.
A couple of things, especially this is what, Vivekananda talks about in Karma Yoga. That's why Karma Yoga, to practice Karma Yoga is very, very difficult. The reason for the same thing, even without our knowledge, the ego takes over the things.
Well, this is exactly why Patanjali has developed this process for us. He's a real scientist. He has developed a process. And if we work the program, as they say in the 12-step programs, if we work the program according to Patanjali's formula, and we really do it, if we really practice the yamas and niyamas, if we really move on to asana, pranayama, pratyahara, and so on, all of these things recede into the background. The process begins to yield its results. So is that clear?
Yes. And the other thing I like it is the one Swamiji says, that our desire is not really a desire for the objects in itself at all, but only a desire to desire something, a mere restlessness in the mind.
Yes, that's well worth taking into our contemplation and meditation. That when my mind is restless, it's going to fix itself on something. And its nature is to be restless. Why? Because it's constantly being agitated by the gunas. The mind and the mental impressions there are constantly being inflected and influenced by the energy of the gunas. And so it is the nature of the mind to develop thoughts and be restless, and it is the nature of the mind, if it isn't controlled, to fix itself on something and say, this I must have, otherwise I won't be happy or free.
Yes.
Thank you. Anything else?
I want to do the example that we're talking about accepting a gift. And I'm kind of thinking that the desire there might be that I just accept the gift and be conforming to the protocols of today. And that itself is the desire. So again, just another angle to that example.
Of course, yes. Well, yes, we are embedded in a culture. The culture has many expectations. As Don Juan Matus says, these are the credentials of our membership, but they need not be our limitations. As is pointed out by the astrophysicist and quantum physicist David Bohm, our potential is infinite. And he looks at this from this science point of view that says, the quantum reality is not limited by time, space, and causation. And so all these things that arise for us in time, space, and causation, such as the credentials of our membership in this culture, they do not need to be limitations. We can transcend them, go beyond them. Thank you for bringing that up. All right. Non-attachment may come very slowly, but even its earliest stages are rewarded by a new sense of freedom and peace. I'm going to repeat that. Now, this is the promise of a realized soul. This is not a guess. This is not a formula of speech. This is knowledge with a capital K from the Swami. Non-attachment, he's saying the effort is worth what happens is worth the effort. Non-attachment may come very slowly, but even its earliest stages are rewarded by a new sense of freedom and peace. It should never be thought of as an austerity, a kind of self-torture, something grim and painful. The practice of non-attachment gives value and significance to even the most ordinary incidents of the dullest day. Non-attachment gives value and significance to even the most ordinary incidents of the dullest day. In other words, when we are keeping our attention focused on what is actually happening and whether it deserves our attention, it makes life much more interesting. We see that the life there's no cause for boredom. There's no cause for it being a dull day, except that tamas is predominant. Okay, when tamas is predominant, you get up off the couch and do something because rajas overcomes tamas. And so then you have to think, well, if I'm going to get up at the couch and do something, what do I do? And so then everything becomes interesting rather than dull again. It eliminates boredom from our lives. And as we progress and gain increasing self-mastery, we shall see that we are renouncing nothing that we really need or want. We are renouncing nothing that we really need or want. We are only freeing ourselves from imaginary needs and desires. And how desirable is that? Freeing ourselves from imaginary needs and desires. In this spirit, a seed grows, and a soul grows in greatness until it can accept its worst disasters, calm and unmoved. Now that may seem beyond our reach. The Swami is saying it's not. It's not. The soul grows in greatness until it can accept life's worst disasters, calm and unmoved. Christ said, "For my yoke is easy and my burden is light," meaning that the ordinary, undiscriminating life of sense attachment is really much more painful, much harder to bear than the disciplines which will set us free. And of course, this is the promise of all of the great teachers. Everyone without exception tells us this. It's much harder to bear the time, space, and causation, desire-laden life than it is to pick up the yoke and put on the yoke that Christ says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It's that yoke and that burden is much easier to bear than the disciplines. It's much harder to, you know what the Swami said, life is much harder to bear than the disciplines which set us free. We find this saying difficult to understand because we have been trained to think of Christ's earthly life as tragic, a glorious, inspiring tragedy, certainly, but ending nevertheless upon a cross. We should rather ask ourselves, which would be easier, to hang on that cross with the enlightenment and non-attachment of a Christ, or to suffer there in the ignorance and agony and bondage of the poor thief. So let's pause there and see if there's anything anyone wants to add or ask.
Brother Shankar, this is Fred.
Yes, Fred.
Good morning. Good morning to everybody here in the class.
Good morning to you.
Thank you. What you said, just read, that stuck out to me was the fact that boredom will be released. And that is totally what I've found through practicing this new path. And it all comes, and what you're reading and describing, the lack of attachment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying I have a lack of attachment or whatever, but I'm just saying this is things I've learned. For me, at first, the first learning was to get into the witness seat. You call it the witness seat.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first awakening point. And then the more you're in the witness seat, it's not a seat of attachment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a seat of detachment. I mean, you're supposed to be witnessing.
Yes.
And it's unbelievable what happens. And then a lot of this kind of flows from there. At least I get some hints of it. I'm not saying anything about myself. I just wanted to share that
Well,
Swami's saying is, it seems for me, started to flow from the witness position.
thank you, Fred. And you were absolutely right in everything you said, including what you said of you said, I'm not saying that you're not attached. None of us are non-attached. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here this afternoon. We're learning about non-attachment, but our attachments are to higher and higher things. This is what Patanjali says. We replace the lower attachments with higher attachments until finally we go beyond all attachment. But that going beyond all attachment is something that he says that's what happens to you. That everything else before that is self-effort. You are making the effort to prepare yourself. And then something happens to you and you become totally free. This is limbs 7 and 8 of this 8-limb yoga. The first 6 limbs, which end in concentration, are effort. And as the Swami said earlier, worth the effort. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
But never think that you're all by yourself. You're surrounded by a loving group of people who share exactly your sense that, of course, I'm not non-attached yet. Anyone else?
Well, if I just, every time I read this one, I just remember a story from the Astavakra. It is for my dhyanam. I keep that in my mind. The story goes like this. Janaka was one of his, closest and favorite disciple. So as he was teaching along with the other disciples of him, they started to develop some kind of a jealousy towards Janaka. So he wanted to teach a lesson to all his disciples. So when he was in the class, he makes the illusion that the city of Janaka's kingdom was burning. So when it was burning, most of these other sannyasis, they start to run just to keep their kaupinam. That is the one the sannyasis wear, just a
Their loincloth, yes.
loincloth, and Janaka is the only one sit tight with calm and quiet. So this is what he was teaching. Hey, Janaka, with all his investments and all those things, still he is the calm person. Look at the difference between you were running around just to save your kaupin. I keep this in my mind all the time.
Well, good. Well, yes. If we let our alarm system, the left mind and its two parts, if we let that alarm system go off and persuade us that we need to save ourselves, we will lose our sense of calm. It's absolutely true. Thank you, Bala. Anyone else?
I would go back to the first part of the paragraph where he started talking about practice of non-attachment. And he also made a statement that you need to start somewhere. And then when you start with small things, you conquer it and it gets replaced with bigger things. And then you'll have to conquer bigger things. So the kind of sense I'm getting is that, even when things are small, like you go to a hotel, there are little soap and things like that, and you just pick it up, or you go to a restaurant, you pick something up, or de minimis, whether you charge $25 or not in your expense report. So these are small things, and you kind of utilize your non-attachment, get rid of it, but then they're replaced with bigger things. Again, this is probably the practice that's being taught here.
But along with it comes this increasing sense of happiness and freedom, and the ability to deal with the bigger things. Yes, we deal with the bigger things, but we're more capable of dealing with them because we've gained some degree of self-mastery. Life doesn't master us. We are becoming the master of life. Thank you. Anything else? All right. So would we rather be hanging on the cross of samsara within the ignorance of the poor thief, or would we rather be hanging on the cross of samsara, which we will as an embodied being? Will we be hanging on the cross of samsara in freedom and knowledge, which was the case, of course, with Christ? That's the comparison being made. And the cross may come to us anyway, whether we are ready and able to accept it or not. And I just said, it does come to us. I'm just amplifying what the Swami says. It may not be that dramatic, but this life within samsara is indeed the cross we bear. Sutra 16. When, through knowledge of the Atman, one ceases to desire any manifestation of nature, then that is the highest kind of non-attachment. Now let's just ponder that. When through knowledge of the Atman, and Fred spoke earlier of being in the witness seat, when we are in that witness seat that is non-reactive and simply observing what is going on in our presence, that is the beginning of the knowledge of the Atman. Oh, there is this calm place within my being from which I can simply observe and not act, certainly not react, but not even be called on to act. I can simply see what's happening. That is the knowledge. But as we develop that capacity, we begin to cease to desire the manifestations of nature. Nature, as used here, is the same word as Maya, or time, space, and causation. So when through knowledge of the Atman, one ceases to desire any manifestation of nature, then that is the highest kind of non-attachment. So we slowly and slowly develop that highest kind of non-attachment. And we'll see as the Swami discusses this one, we slowly become non-attached even toward the good thoughts and our way of being ethical and so on. As true freedom is independence of all of that. And as Swami Vivekananda pointed out, fetters though of gold are not less strong to bind. So ultimately we go beyond good and evil. We go beyond all of these considerations at all. And that is now using the real superlative, that is the highest kind of non-attachment, which, as the Swami points out, develops gradually. Non-attachment is not indifference. This cannot be repeated too often. Non-attachment is not indifference. This cannot be repeated too often. Many people reject the aims. Many people reject the aims of yoga philosophy as inhuman and selfish because they imagine yoga as a cold, deliberate shunning of everybody and everything for the sake of working on one's own salvation. You've heard the expression, I bet you, oh, it's just navel gazing. Selfish navel gazing. And, people will say these two things to you in various ways, that you're being selfish. They don't understand you're being self-determined, but they'll say you're selfish because they imagine yoga as a cold, deliberate shunning of everybody and everything for the sake of working on one's own salvation. The truth is exactly opposite. Human love is the highest emotion most of us know. It frees us to some extent from our egoism and our relation in our relation to one or more individuals. It frees us to some extent from our egoism in our relation to one or more individuals. Why? Because we cannot practice just I, me, mine when we are in this love relationship. We must think in terms of thou, thee, thine. The moment we begin to think outside of the box of I, me, mine, and move into the box of thou, thee, thine, we are more free. And it feels good. This is why love feels good. So I think it's clear to everyone what the Swami means. But let's just make sure that we're all on the same page here. Does everyone understand that yoga is not selfish? It is not, it is being self-determined, not selfish. And so you may indeed no longer welcome the company of some of the people you used to keep company with. And they'll be annoyed about this. Well, I invited you to this, that, or the other thing, and you didn't come. I sent you a message, and your response was either nothing or not welcoming. Well, it's easy to understand why this is so, because their company pulls you downward rather than lifts you up. And so it isn't that you're saying they're bad and wrong, that there's anything wrong with them. It's simply that you need what you need in terms of time and space to pursue what it is that you're pursuing. But if they need you, if for some reason they need your sustenance or support, they'll find that you are there for them. But you're no longer willing to just chat. Is all that clear? Okay.
So this might be a little theoretical, but in the Sutra number 16, we say, went through the knowledge of Atman. I thought that was pretty much the objective of Jnana Yoga, but we're seeing it here. Maybe I'm confusing things.
Within Jnana Yoga, the term used is Brahman. Now, they are identical, it's true, but Brahman is, there's no way for us to really think about Brahman. We can, there is a way to think about Brahman, but it is Saguna Brahman, or Maya, or Shakti. That is Saguna Brahman. In the same sense, within the yoga philosophy, that same idea is spoken of as Atman. The Atman is this, the reason there is this term is that it seems that there is an individual Atman in each of us, which in Sankhya philosophy is called Purusha. There seems to be an individual Purusha, or divine being, in each of us. In fact, they are non-separate. Consciousness is primary and is not plural. But it seems to be there. And one of the aspects that is emphasized in Raja Yoga, or Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, is this idea of Saguna. Saguna Atman. Atman with attributes. It has intentions. It experiences what we experience and thereby sanctions the experiences. This is the personal God appearing to us, and the first thing that we know of this is when we begin to sense there's something in me, there's something within me that simply sees everything that's going on. It's not my mind. My mind reacts and explains and this and does all those things that it does. But it's not that. It's something else. And this is that witness aspect, which is the face of the Atman in our experience. but it is not the full Atman, because the Atman in its fullness is, as with Brahman, cannot be really and truly spoken of because it's infinite, eternal, changeless. We say those words without knowing anything truly of what they mean, because we can't. As St. Catherine of Siena said, we know nothing until we know everything. But we know a higher and higher form of nothing, Vidya, Vidyamaya. We know a higher and higher form of Vidyamaya, one of which is this aspect of the face of the Atman, which appears to us as this witness seat. And when we more and more dependably occupy that witness seat, we become less and less vulnerable to desire and to pain, which is why Sri Krishna says in the Gita that yoga is the breaking of contact with pain. That we see the pain. And now I'm not talking about physical pain. Physical pain is a different thing. I'm talking about the psychological, psychic, samsara kind of anguish and pain. Physical pain is a very, very difficult thing to deal with when the body begins to break down and be in terrible pain. Even that can be overcome, but it's a long way down the road. There has to be true self-mastery for that. Thank you for bringing that out. Anything else?
Shankaraji, I have a question.
Yes, dear.
I think in this 16th Sutra, Swamiji is also bringing the topic of Viveka, right? What is
Oh, yes.
what
That is.
what? Yes.
Yes, well, that is discrimination. That is the Sanskrit word for discrimination, viveka, the ability to discern the real from the unreal. And it's our practice of yoga sharpens that ability to discriminate. And so we begin to say, there's less and less within nature, within Maya, within time, space, and causation that is attractive to me. And this is where, as I said, we get in trouble with the other people who share our membership in this culture, and they say, "Oh, you're navel gazing. You're leaving us behind. You don't want to be involved with us anymore. You don't come to our parties. You won't do this. You won't do that. You're no longer interested in watching the latest movie," and so on. You're no longer desiring those things of nature that nature endlessly provides. We live in a realm of endless noise and relentless delusion. And so when we no longer wish to be exposed to all that noise, and we wish to be free from those delusions, other people will not necessarily share that with us. And so, yes, discrimination, viveka, is our tool. And the way it's often said from here is to think about discrimination, just think in terms of what deserves my attention. Anything else?
I have a silly question.
Yes?
People call this navel gazing. What is the underlying thing? Why do they call that?
Well, the navel is the solar plexus. At the navel is the solar plexus. Some forms of meditation, and Patanjali will talk about this later on in the Powers section, chapter 3. You focus on the much greater power than we know that exists in that third spiritual center. And this manifests as the psychic powers. And so navel gazing is, I'm surprised you hadn't heard that term before.
Oh, this is the first time I'm hearing.
Navel gazing is, focusing your attention on and it's for those people who desire psychic powers. They may in fact become selfish rather than self-determined. And I say that because they're emphasizing the I, me, mine aspect of people, of themselves, in their desire to have greater control over themselves in the psychic sense, and thereby dominate other people, control other people. One of the intuitive and perhaps more than intuitive aspects of this, persons who actually embodied this, was Adolf Hitler. And Adolf Hitler had mastered certain psychic powers and was able to manifest those through his voice. The voice, I don't want to get off into the powers section too early, but as you can see, if you listen to the speeches, if you watch some of Rennie Liefenstahl's films about Hitler, and you see the effect that his voice had on these crowds, nothing more than his amplified voice and the use of music and drama. But this is something that actually manifests in the world. This is not something theoretical. So all of that is there. Navel gazing is, so to speak, the more inauspicious aspect of yoga. It's there. Patanjali describes it in great detail. Chapter 3 is extensive. And Swamiji was asked, why did he do that? And Swami Vivekananda. Swamiji said, it's because he's a scientist. He couldn't ignore it. That it's there. It is a potential of yoga, and it is a great distraction. It is a great detour. It is desiring the higher forms of nature that most of us are purely ignorant of. And as Swami Prabhavananda points out later in this book, we're fortunate that most people who have tendencies in that direction have nowhere near the self-discipline to actually manifest their ability to control it. Thank you, Bala. And it's not a silly question at all. We need to get these things flat. When you're not clear what's being talked about, you should make it known. What the heck are you talking about? Anything else?
This may be off topic, brother. This is Fred, but a few minutes ago you mentioned, I think, attaining a state beyond good and evil.
Yes.
And it just came to my mind an incident in one of the Gospels where Jesus was addressed by somebody as good master. And Jesus' reply was something like, why do you call me good? There is none good but the Father.
Yes. He was beyond good and evil.
Right. It just so obvious to me now. Well, yeah, that's an example of that, right?
Yep. That's why he could do what he did. He was free of limitations. He was Kaivalya. He was independent. Thank you, Fred. And that is not off topic at all. Anything else from anyone? All right. To some extent, it frees us from love, frees us to some extent from our egoism in our relation to one or more individuals. But human love is still possessive and exclusive. That's why it gives rise to jealousy and hatred of others. But human love is still possessive and exclusive. Love for the Atman is neither. Love for the Atman, for the divine presence, is neither exclusive, it can't be exclusive, nor is it possessive. What is there to possess? Like I say, only those people who have this tendency to want power and dominance, they'll try to use what seems to them to be the power of the Atman, but it's not. It's just the hidden powers of the human psyche and mind. Love for the Atman is neither exclusive nor possessive. We readily admit that it is better to love people for what they really are than merely for their beauty, their intelligence, their strength, their sense of humor, or some other duality, some other quality. It's better to love them for themselves than for these attributes. But it is only a vague and relative phase. But this is only, I'm going to read that again since I read it so badly. We readily admit that it is better to love people for what they really are, the divine being, than merely for their beauty, their intelligence, their strength, their sense of humor, or some other quality. But this is only a vague and relative phase. What people really are is the Atman, nothing less. There seems to be, 4 times 4, 16 Atman here? In fact, there's only one Atman, but it appears in these embodied beings. We clothe that limitless intelligence in this breathing being, this stardust spaceship. So what people really are is the Atman, nothing less. To love the Atman in ourselves is to love it everywhere. Now just let that be part of your concentration, your contemplation, concentration, and meditation. To love the Atman in ourselves is to love it everywhere. This is why Christ said, love thy neighbor as thyself, because he was speaking about the self, capital S. If you truly love yourself, the Atman within you, which is easier to do than you think, then you must love it everywhere. Once you discover that witness being within yourself, and it's what it does when you're with it. As the Swami said, slowly, gradually, you begin to shed everything else in the way of what you want. Slowly and slowly, because only it is really significant to you. To love the Atman in ourselves is to love it everywhere. And to love the Atman everywhere is to go beyond any manifestation of nature to the reality within nature. Such a love is too vast to be understood by ordinary minds, and yet it is simply an infinite deepening and expansion of the little limited love that we all experience. Notice that Satchidananda, the last word of the Ananda part of Satchidananda, can be translated as love rather than bliss, and often is. That is that infinite that he's speaking of. And so when we are touch the Atman and begin to love the Atman, we are loving that infinite that is a deepening and an expansion of the little limited love. So there's nothing different in it except a matter of degree. So it is now noon. It is 1 o'clock. So any final loving thoughts from anyone? All right. Om Hari Om. Om Asato Ma Satgamaya. Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya. Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Abir Hoiti. O dearly beloved Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from this realm of endless noise and relentless delusion to thine abode of silence, serenity, clarity, and peace. Lead us from this realm of endless noise and relentless delusion to thine abode of silence, serenity, clarity, and peace. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from darkness and ignorance to the brilliance of thy wisdom and love. Lead us from death to immortality. Lead us from death to immortality. Light us through and through. Light us through and through with thy everlasting, shining presence. Om Shanti, 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. O Lord, may it be so. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ki Jai, Durga, Durga, Durga. May we be safe. May we be healthy. May we be cheerful. May we have peace of mind. May we go forward in the loving and protective embrace of the Divine Being as our Mother and Father. So until next time, how lovely to be with you, and I'm going to sign off.
Brother.
Shankaraji.
Thank you, dears.